Hi everyone. In this series of videos, we're going to talk about a very discussed topic, dieting and weight loss. The purpose of these videos is to introduce you to the fundamental concept necessary to understand how fat loss works and how to create a diet that you can sustain, and more important, a diet that will keep you from regaining the fat again. The most important point that I want to clarify now is the fact the fat loss is not a sprint, but it's a marathon, and the journey doesn't end when you reach your ideal body weight and body fat percentage, but it goes on, because you have to maintain that physique that you achieved and not slip back into your old habits. I don't want to scare you, but I just want you to tell what it's like, because you must have a realistic sight on the matter, which, in my opinion, is the most important thing. So let's begin. The first question is, why should you care about losing fat? Your health. That's the real answer. Aesthetics are just a bonus, the cherry on top of being lean and healthy. I think that if you understand the real purpose of fat loss, you will be able to be consistent and to create a whole new set of habits to keep the weight off. Benefits related to fat loss are not limited to increased longevity, decreased risk of heart disease, decreased risk of cancer, decreased risk of diabetes, improved quality of life. And you can achieve these benefits regardless the type of diet you chose to follow: keto, vegetarian, vegan, carnivore. The most important thing is this, and you should impress it in your mind and remember like a mantra: calories in versus calories out. That's the gold rule. You will lose body fat if you consume less calories than the ones you're burning during the day. So there is no magic trick, no spell, no diet, no food or whatever you can imagine that can make it different. It's the law of thermodynamics. So now you might be wondering, why diet are failing? A shocking truth is that people are able to lose the weight, but they are not capable of keep it off. The statistics are different depending on the source, but within 1 year of weight loss, around 50 to 70% of people will have regained all the weight they lost. Further, 85% of people will gain it back within 2 years of losing it. Within 3 years of weight loss, 95% of people will have gained it all back. Thus, the success rate of diets is about 5%. If it wasn't bad enough, out of the people who regain weight, 1/3 to 2/3, you heard it right, will add back more weight that they originally lost. Not only do they fail to maintain their weight loss, but they end up worse than before they ever started dieting. These behaviors are called yo-yo dieting. There are many reasons why this happens, and I will cover it in another video, but the important aspect to take out is to understand how not to fall into this trap. That's terrible, but it's the truth, and you know it, or because you've been there or because you witnessed with some friend or family member. So number one thing to remember is, there is no quick fix. Those things may work in the short term, but they will lead to more damage than benefit in the long term, pushing you furthermore away from your goal. So the real question should be, how much weight did I drop and I was able to sustain? As said, many people end up worse than when they started because they actually put back on more weight than they lost in a process called weight cycling. An example might be Oprah, but she's not the only one, of someone who yo-yo dieted for a long time. Over the years, she gained and lost weight many times, but almost always seemed to gain it back plus interests. Many other people do the same thing. They will go from one diet to another in the search for the Holy Grail. They will lose some weight, then gain it back, and then repeat the process over and over again, like a loophole. But why our body makes us gaining back the weight? Well, dieting or calories restriction activates some serious self-defense systems in our bodies. It derives from an evolutional standpoint, because our bodies are designed to make us survive during a famine or when food is scarce. That's why we carry body fat. Fat is energy stored. Our bodies doesn't know that food is not scarce nowadays, and so it makes us hungry because it senses a danger, and so when we are dieting, hunger signals are increased. Also, our genetics play a role in this context. I'm referring to the body fat set point theory. This theory suggests that each individual person has a level of body fat where their body naturally sits, 15% to 20%, you name it. Everyone is different, and the body defends that level in an attempt to maintain it. That number is also influenced by genetics, nutritional habits, activity, and many other factors, so everyone has a different number. This set point is believed to be controlled by the hormone leptin, which responds to changes in the size of adipocytes. The body fat set point is sensed by the size of individual fat cells. As the cell starts to shrink during an energy deficit, the adipose tissue cells reduce their secretion of leptin. This reduced metabolic rate, calories out, increases hunger, calories in, and tries to drive the body back towards the set point by swinging the body's caloric balance to a positive direction. During a caloric surplus, fat cells expand and leptin secretion increases, which increases metabolic rate, decreases hunger, and drives calorie balance in a negative direction to bring the body back down towards your body fat point. The defensive set point is so powerful that even after a prolonged diet, your body will fight to bring back your adipocyte size to their start point. However, don't panic. If you keep for a long period of time a lower body fat percentage than your set one, eventually your body will adapt and will make it easier for you to keep that lower percentage. You see, it's a marathon, you need consistency, there are no overnight solutions. One of the central ideas I want to hit is that every time you diet, eat in a caloric/energy deficit, you are activating the body's self-defense system. The more you attempt to diet, the stronger the signal to your body to strengthen this defense system is. Is believed, based on data, this is why people who diet more often during their life are more likely to gain body fat over time instead of losing it long term. It's not that dieting makes people fat, of course not. Someone can't gain fat in an energy deficit, because that would defy the laws of physics. It's because they diet repeatedly and interrupt each diet with regaining the weight more rapidly than they lost it. Thus, they are activating this self-defense system repeatedly. Then, when the diet is over and they can no longer sustain the energy deficit, they regain the fat they lost, usually relatively quickly, and often add more fat than they lost in the first place. In this way, the body has defended against famine and further protected itself against future potential starvation. Finally, people who engage in this chronic weight cycling/yo-yo dieting for months, years, or even decades are further potentiating this self-defense system every time they do so. When we diet, the body's main defense system to limit energy depletion is called metabolic adaptation. There will be a specific video on this topic, but essentially, we're talking of a series of biological adaptation to energy restriction that result in a slowing of metabolic rate to a greater extent than is our normal daily energy expenditure. Metabolic adaptation includes, but is not limited to, the adaptations that cause a decrease in your basal metabolic rate, BMR, massive decrease in your non-exercise adaptive thermogenesis, NEAT, which will be a topic for another video, alterations to your hormone profile, including leptin, ghrelin, thyroid hormone in a way that reduces your metabolic rate and at the same time increases your hunger. In fact, almost anyone who has dieted has noticed that when they first start, it's pretty easy to lose weight, but you don't continue to lose weight at the same rate indefinitely. Indeed, weight loss slows down over time and eventually stops. But why? If you were still eating the same amount of calories, shouldn't weight loss continue? Metabolic adaptation stops weight loss in its tracks because what was once an energy deficit eventually becomes energy balance, calories consumed now equals calories expended, and weight loss stops unless further restriction is imposed. That's not all. Your body also upregulates the systems that is in charge of regulating fat deposition and increase hunger, so that eventually when you finish your diet and you begin to eat more, you'll gain the weight much faster and more efficiently than you lost it. Even while you're dieting, your body is already setting you up for regaining the fat by activating systems that improve the efficiency of energy storage, which directs the increased energy, calories, you consume in the post-diet setting towards preferential fat regain. Not only are you storing fat more efficiently during this initial post-diet period, but your hunger is also much greater due to lower levels of leptin, insulin, neuropeptide Y, as well as increased secretion of the hormone ghrelin, which is responsible of hunger increase. Just to help you screw up more, the body also can play a massive trick that makes energy storage more efficient. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that if you regain body fat too quickly during the initial post-diet phase, not only can you regain body fat quickly, but you can actually add new fat cells. Typically, your fat cells simply shrinks or expand as you lose and gain weight. However, in an effort to defend your body against future starvation, it adapts by increasing the potential for energy storage. All this just to remember you that dieting is not something to be taken lightly, and you need to do it in the right way to succeed. Otherwise you'll risk to fail and you'll find yourself in a position worse than the one you were before. Let's make an example to make it more clear. If Joe has a metabolic rate that expends 2,300 calories per day, his TDE, and he begins a diet that puts him at 1,500 calories per day, his energy deficit is 800 calories per day. With this deficit, he will lose weight. If he was 100 kilograms when he started, maybe he gets to 90 kilograms before metabolic adaptation catches up to him and he finally plateaus at 90 kilograms. This means that 1,500 calories per day is now his TDE, and if Joe keeps eating 1,500 calories a day, he will neither gain nor lose weight. Maybe Joe is happy with this and decides the diet is done or that he can go back to eating like he used to. Or maybe Joe has some difficult life circumstances or stress and he falls off the wagon. Whatever the reason, Joe starts eating more, except now the research data suggests that Joe will actually eat more than previously because his hunger hormones will be elevated, causing what's known as a hyperphagic response, which is well documented in the literature. If Joe is eating 2,500 calories per day because he's so glad the diet is over or because he's stress eating, which is common for many people, now he's actually in an energy surplus of 1,000 calories per day and will begin regaining weight rapidly. In fact, the research data suggests he's likely to blow past his original starting weight, since his hunger hormones won't likely normalize until he's regained more than he lost. What's more, these adaptations persist for years after the diet is finished. In the case of people who lose massive amounts of weight, Joe may end up weighing 110 kilograms before his weight finally stabilizes and his metabolic rate returns to normal. Moreover, if he initially regains some of that weight too rapidly, then he may have increased his total number of fat cells, making it more difficult for him to lose weight in the future. The example that I just presented you may seem like a way to scare you, but that is not the purpose. I want you to be well aware of the risks of doing things without knowing the reason why and following the latest trend on social media. Remember, knowledge is power. You should be concerned about the way you diet and whether or not you can sustain weight loss. Some of you may thinking, well, if I lost it once, I can lose it again, and maybe all this stuff is simply a case of people pigging out post-diet and simply adding more fat because they overeat calories. That's a good point, but there is data to suggest that it's not just a case. One study examined groups of rats who either engage in 2 rounds of weight cycling behavior, lose one time, regain, lose again, regain it back, or simply continuously overfed. What they discovered was shocking. In the second cycle, there was a massive, 4 times, increase in food efficiency, defined as weight gained per calorie of food intake. During the second cycle, they lost weight half the rate of the first cycle and they regained it at 3 times the rate compared to the first cycle. Okay, the study was done on rats, not human, but evidence are pretty strong to suggest that something similar may happen also with human. Also empirical evidence are pointing to this direction. But why the ones who promotes diet doesn't talk about this consequences? Probably it is in their interest, don't you think? They'll keeping you in the loop of buying their books, their products, and they make money while you lose the weight and they fail to keep it off and start again. It's a vicious cycle. The Biggest Loser TV show is a great example. The participants on this show are pushed to lose enormous amounts of weight at any cost to win, using aggressive diet and exercise programs. The regime they are following is unsustainable in the long run, so what happens to them? There have been many studies conducted on these people that showed exactly the effect of metabolic adaptation, to resist further weight loss and favor weight regain. In fact, by the end of the show, the participants' basal metabolic rates declined over 26% more than they should have based on the amount of weight they lost. Further, virtually all the participants added back large amount of fat, and these metabolic adaptation persisted at least 6 years after the show ended. At the start, the average metabolic rate was about 2,500 kilocalories per day. By 30 weeks on the show, this had dropped to 1,996 kilocalories per day. The subject then regained 41 kilograms over the next 6 years, but their metabolic rate didn't increase at all. Someone might say that the show was a success, because even though they regained 41 kilograms, they still kept off about 17 kilograms from the beginning of the show, but this statement overlooks a big issue. Most of these people still aren't going to be happy at 130 and plus kilos. If they are, good for them. I'm not here to say that you can't be 130 kilograms if you feel comfortable. You can be whoever you want as long as you're happy. But many of them are not happy and they want to lose more weight. However, their metabolism are now extremely suppressed at just over 1,900 calories per day on average, even over 6 years later. This means for them to lose weight is going to be even more difficult than the first time, and they would likely have to diet for a longer period of time to achieve the same results of someone who started a weight loss journey for the first time. But don't lose hope, I'm going to teach you how to lose weight and at the same time deal with metabolic adaptation in order to keep the process going and overcome plateaus without creating damage. The key is adherence and, most important, sustainability. You have to create habits you can follow for the rest of your lives, and to do something forever you must first of all enjoy it and don't see it as a punishment or something bad. You have to find the diet, exercise regime you can stick to it for the rest of your life. Everyone is different. Someone like keto, someone is vegetarian, someone can only train 2 days a week, someone has a busy life. It doesn't matter, everyone can achieve weight loss, but you must understand that you have to create a plan that is adequate to you. I know that this video might be a little bit harsh for someone, truth oftentimes is, but now I hope that you're free of illusions and, more important, aware that fitness industry, not everyone, is mostly selling shit to keep you in the loop and rip off your money with the new compound, the new fat loss pill, and all the crap you can imagine. In the next video we will talking about the fundamentals of nutrition, energy balance. Hope you like the video. If so, please leave a comment, like, share with your friends and subscribe to the channel. Let's make one more step towards success.